I'm excited for you all to join me today for a conversation with my friend Angela O'Brien. We are chatting about the importance of exposure and inclusion as it relates to the special needs community. Angela is a professional organizer, host of the Especially Organized podcast, and a special needs mom. Angela is an amazing advocate for the special needs community, and I hope you'll listen to this episode and feel inspired to find ways to expose yourself and your family to special needs families in your community. Hi, I'm Allison and Egidi, a pediatric sleep and wellness coach and a mom of two. I love to help parents find solutions. This is How Long Till Bedtime. Well, hi, Angela. It's so good to see you. Thank you so much for joining me today. As way of background for the listeners, we met last summer at a podcast conference when we ended up at the same table during the welcome session, and it felt somewhat serendipitous to me, and we became fast friends. And I had recently had an interesting experience with my own children as it relates to the special needs community. And then I saw you sharing a story about it, and it prompted me to reach out to you to ask you to come on and chat with me a little bit about the importance of exposure and inclusion within the special needs community. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. But before we dive in, the first question I always like to ask my guests is, what inspired you to pursue your vocation and to start your business?
Oh, well, thank you for having me on, and it's so wonderful to connect with you again. It was serendipitous that we got to meet at the same table at that conference last year. But I think so I am by trade a professional organizer and an Enneagram coach, and I host a podcast for families of kids with special needs, focusing on organizing and helping them to reclaim whatever it is that they need. But I think that all stemmed from wanting to support the disability community because I am the mom of a 20-year-old daughter with Down syndrome. And so it is not my nature to be a strong advocate, but I have had to grow into that role over the years of parenting, and I've seen just a need for advocating for this community. They have a lot to offer us, and as someone who was quite probably uneducated, unaware, and just fearful of, once I got that diagnosis that she had Down syndrome, I was really quite scared, and I had no idea what to expect. I had just this unknown ahead of me, and I want future parents to know that we don't have to fear the unknown. It doesn't have to be unknown, honestly. And there is a lot that our kids can offer us. And so I think that's where all of this stems from.
Yeah. And I'm fortunate that I grew up with great family friends, our closest friends. We spent Christmas Eve with them every year, who had a child my age with Down syndrome. And so I'm fortunate that I had that exposure. And then I'm also fortunate that my children have had exposure once in preschool with a child in a wheelchair. And then more recently, we've had some exposure to a special needs individual. And that whole thing prompted me to think about the fact that not everyone is in that situation, which is why I thought this was an important conversation to have. And I think exposure leads to inclusion. And you can correct me if you disagree, but I think they probably go hand in hand. And so I would love to just start by asking you why you think it's really important that our children have exposure to other children and people who fall into that special needs category.
Yeah, it's become super important, I think, as as our society grows. There's quite a few reasons for that. One is that people with disabilities, especially intellectual disabilities, are living longer, healthier, happier lives. They are being more included in our communities. We're going to see them more at the YMCA. We're going to see them more at the grocery store. We're going to see them more in our churches and in our schools. And thanks to advancing healthcare and because of the parents ahead of me fostering that sense of inclusion, we are seeing them more in our community. The average lifespan for someone with Down syndrome back in I think it was 83, was 25 years old. Well, now it's 60.
Oh,
They are
wow.
living longer, healthier, happier lives. And so we are going to see them in the communities more. And I think that doesn't just benefit those with intellectual disabilities, it benefits everyone around. And I think the earlier that we can expose our young children to people with intellectual disabilities, the better off that they are going to be. They are not going to, if they in the future have a child with Down syndrome or autism, they are not going to be as fearful as I was or as uneducated as I was. They are going to have a greater sense of cognitive empathy. They are going to have that ability to kind of see, have some compassion and understanding for other people that are different than them. And I think that just is, it's a really good lesson for them. I was reminded the other day, I was talking with an early childhood development expert, and she talked about in preschool, that is their first lesson in civics, their first lesson in social responsibility. It's the first time they're in this group of people that are different than them, of people that aren't in their social circle with their family and their friends. And it's a really great time for them to be exposed to people that are different, because they don't have any bias towards people that are intellectually disabled or people that are physically disabled. It just is. And the more that we can continue that mindset,
Yes.
the better. Because I think, I was born in 1970. I grew up, with this idea that they were different than us. They should not be in our schools. It was, they should be separated from us. And so I grew up uncomfortable, and I was afraid to offend. I was afraid to say something. And so when she was born, oh my goodness, it was really quite a hurdle for me to kind of overcome kind of my own fears and my own biases. And so I think that the sooner we can do that and educate our young children, the better off we are all going to be. And I think there are just so many benefits for our young children without disabilities to learn a lot. I just think too, I think about my own son. He's 2.5 years older than my daughter. One of my greatest fears was about him. I was worried, how is this going to affect him? How is this going to impact his life? And that was one of the things I needed to worry about the least, because it has impacted him so much, but in such a positive way. He has learned so much compassion. He has so much comfort around. He just is very comfortable around people that are different than him, and I'm so grateful for that opportunity for him to have learned that. Yeah.
That's amazing. It's interesting you say that about preschool, because as I mentioned, my daughters had this exposure. Specifically, my oldest daughter was in this little boy's class, and he would come for the summer to this daycare preschool they attended. And it's funny because I remember when I started to see him arriving, and I would think, oh my gosh, I hope my children don't say something out of line. That was my first thought. And he had a little electric wheelchair. He had spinal muscular atrophy. He has since passed away. He actually passed away while they were still in preschool. But he was full of personality. He was so spicy. And It's interesting that you say that it just is what it is, because my kids were not phased at all. And I remember Addison just saying, his wheelchair's fast. He can zip around. And they had changed some things around the playground so he could go out. And he was sassy and my daughter was sassy. And so they had a real back and forth going, and it just was. But what I have noticed going forward, and this happened the last 6 weeks, we kind of got jammed in the grocery store with someone in a wheelchair. And again, I have that moment where I'm like, oh gosh, I hope the kids can navigate this. And I don't know why I sometimes have that anxiety about it. But because they've had this exposure, they really walked by this woman and said, hello.
Yeah.
And we just said, excuse us. And, we shifted by and they took it in stride. Mm-hmm. Our more recent exposure was to someone with intellectual disabilities, something they hadn't really been exposed to before. Mm-hmm. And I didn't love their reaction. And I think it was just discomfort. And they didn't know what to do with his very large personality that was very friendly, but an adult. And there's that stranger danger.
Right. Yep. Understandable.
Like, yeah. Oh my gosh, this adult man is really in our business here, wanting to ask questions. And it was a very different experience for them as compared to what they had been exposed to in preschool. So that's a really interesting note that you made, that earlier is better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Earlier is better. And I'm sure, in your daughter's instance with this young man, there's all these other components to it. They're females. He's this older gentleman, so there's just that dynamic that you have to consider. But the earlier that they can understand, oh, there are people with intellectual disabilities out there that might have some behaviors that are different than the norm, right? They might have some stimming behaviors. They might rock back and forth. They might have some sounds that they make that are different. And being able to be comfortable with that and to move through it comfortably, so that they can just kind of like, oh yeah, that is what it is, because those people are doing that for a reason. They have all behavior is communication, right? They're communicating in some way. And so just having that understanding and not being, like overwhelmed by that, it from the get-go, I think that they have a better way to navigate it, right? They have a better way to navigate those differences they might see out there.
Absolutely. And I had to kind of change my thought process, because first I was very frustrated with them. And then I did step back and think, okay, I could see why they may have been a little timid. Mm-hmm. They weren't really responding to him. So my thought was like, oh, they're being so rude. But I realized they don't know what's happening. So
exactly.
I had a conversation with them. This was someone we are exposed to on a weekly basis. And so I had a conversation with them, and they said, okay. I explained he had intellectual disabilities. They asked questions. What are they? I don't know. I don't know this individual, but everyone has, special things about them. And I can tell you without knowing him that one of his special things is he's very friendly and he's very interested in people. That's why he was trying to ask you about your swimming. And so we walked through it, and then I decided I'm not going to force them to talk to him, because they're also in an age where, frankly, it's hard for me to force them to talk to any adults.
Right.
So
right.
I said, I'm just going to lead by example. That was my approach. So every day I would go in and I would say, hi, how are you? Yes, the girls are swimming. Oh, and he has lots of questions. And so a couple times later, the girl said, he asks you the same thing over and over. And I said, I know he does. But also, did you notice now he knows when I'm coming in? So he'll see me and he'll seek me out. And I said, because as we sit there in that lobby, you can see the people who are incredibly uncomfortable with his energy. And then you can see the people who are comfortable with it. And I said, and do you notice he obviously notices that too? Because he gravitates then to the people who have shown him kindness. Okay. There's a lot of, yep. And then one day, I think it was a day I'd message you the next day, we're coming in, and I thought, oh, here he comes. And I said, hello. And he said, hi, girls. And they both got a big smile on their face. And they said, hi. And he said, are you swimming? Yes. And they both completely engaged. It was night and day. Granted, this probably took about 4 or 5 weeks, but I thought, okay, that continued exposure, me demonstrating how we could engage with him, it was kind of delightful. And when we left, I said, that was so nice that you chatted with him. And they said, oh, he's very nice. You would have thought they'd been chatting with him for weeks. But I left feeling so grateful that I had this opportunity. And I think that can be tricky too. I don't think everyone has that opportunity. I'm curious if you have thoughts on if someone's listening and saying, well, sure, I'd love to have my children have exposure, but I don't know folks, in my circle.
Yeah.
How do you have ideas on how we can help our children get exposure?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say kudos to you, because our kids take their lead from their parents, right? And so you just giving them an opportunity to watch and learn how you responded to him and how you interacted with him gave them that confidence that it's okay to talk with him and engage with him. And just that is exactly what I would tell parents to do, is lead by example. You don't have to make your young children feel uncomfortable talking to an adult, but you demonstrating, they are going to take their lead from you. And so that just brings chills to my skin, because it really is that is so helpful and so empowering for our kids. So as far as ideas on how to, if you are looking for ways to get more involved or just have some more exposure to people in the disability community, I mean, there are lots of ways. I think a lot of cities in the United States participate in what's called a buddy walk, and it's a fundraiser, but it's also just kind of a community event for people with Down syndrome and their families. And it's usually a really fun event where you just walk a short mile, but you have activities and tents and fun things going on and food trucks and that kind of stuff, and you get to interact with a lot of people who have loved ones with Down syndrome. So that would be one way. You could look up the local buddy walk. I'm sure there are similar things for autism, things like that. The other is that I know that there are more and more opportunities for our young kids with intellectual disabilities to be included in our public schools and our preschools. And if you find that that is something in your area, I would recommend that you investigate that. You find out if that's something that would make sense for your child. My daughter attended it was a private preschool here in Dallas, but it was specifically for kids with intellectual disabilities, toddlers, 1 through 5, but they also had typical preschoolers in the program. And so it was this mixture, because my daughter with Down syndrome learns from her peers, right? And so having some typical peers to model off of was really a great way for her to learn. But it was also really, really beneficial for the young toddlers who were typical, so that they could, again, get that cognitive empathy, understand, be leaders. They learned how to be some leaders in their classroom. So it really, there were benefits to both. And so I'm seeing more and more of that kind of model of a preschool coming out. So if that makes sense for your child, and if there's an opportunity, that might be a way. And the same with public school. Elementary school is a great, a lot of times they will have, it does make a lot more sense for our young kids with intellectual disabilities to be included in their classrooms in elementary school. It's a lot easier at that time. We're working on it. They are absolutely included in higher levels of education, middle school and high school. It gets a little bit more tricky, but it's still just as important. So if you can encourage your kids to interact with those that they see at their schools, tell your teachers, hey, my kid would love to be, I'd love for my kid to be in so-and-so's class. Just being curious about that and being open-minded about how that can benefit your own child, I think is kind of the first step, really.
And what's a good way? So once you get into elementary school, I think kids become a little more self-conscious and noticing differences. I'm curious, I'm sure there are some amazing teachers who do a great job helping children bridge that gap. But if your child's in a public school and you're thinking, yep, we have some children in the class. I know in our local public school here near my neighborhood, there are certainly some children who have intellectual disabilities. How can a parent from their end at home encourage their child to engage with that child?
That's a great question. I think first of all, kids are curious, right? And so they might have questions, and letting them be curious, first of all, not trying to shush them, oh, don't ask that, or don't, trying to kind of cover it up, because then that kind of implies, oh, we don't talk about that. Oh, that's negative. That's, scary, or you don't want to give off that impression. It's okay to be curious. And as you're talking with your child, having kind of a non-bias towards disability, it is neither good nor bad. It is just different. It is just that they need help learning, or they need help walking, or they need help in some other capacity. That would be first of all. I think second of all, if they could in some way reach out as parents to the other parent, to that child's parent, and get to know them. That doesn't mean they have to force play dates on them. Maybe they could meet at the park, or maybe they could just, talk and get to know each other. And when they see that child, approach them and say hi and include them and notice them, even if they're nonverbal and they can't communicate back. Just acknowledging their presence, I think, goes a long way to just fostering, like what you did, modeling that sense of just comfort, increased comfort around people with disabilities. But I think it really can start with also just reaching out to the parents of those individuals. I will tell you the shadow side of all of this is there's some loneliness. There is we are in our own world a lot of times because we have a lot of extra responsibilities. We have extra therapies, medical appointments, things that we are doing. And so, and we can feel left out, to be totally honest.
Yeah.
Our kids don't get invited to a lot of birthday parties and things like that. That doesn't mean that you have to invite our kids to the birthday party, but just reaching out and acknowledging and trying to include in some way, or just trying to learn and educate and saying, I'm going to mess up, but I really would like to learn and understand what it's like to be in your shoes and how we can possibly help and include you. Like that would go such a long way.
Well, that was going to be my next question, is if that it's a whole other important side of it is the parents. And I think as parents, fellow parents, we don't want to say the wrong thing or misstep. Right. And so my next question was going to be, how do you suggest that we broach talking to parents where it's not, oh, I see little Susie loves soccer too, because maybe little Susie isn't playing soccer. And so yours basically sounds like you're saying just be somewhat direct.
Yeah. I think just being open and honest and saying, yeah, I'm probably going to mess up. I might say the wrong things, but that's not my intent. I want to learn. I want to, potentially be friends. That will go a long way, honestly, toward just bridging that gap. I think in terms of language, there, I think the disability is as different inside as it is, of all, everybody's different, right? And so I know people in the Down syndrome community, they prefer that people use people first language. That's what we call it, where we don't kind of define someone as being a Down syndrome person. We say someone with Down syndrome, right? Where people in the autism community might think differently about that. Some of them prefer to be called autistic, so even within the Down syndrome, even within the disability community, there's going to be, disagreements on what's the proper way to say things. And so I think just being honest and asking the person, what do you prefer is, I'm trying to educate my child, and can you help me? Like what are some things that how would you describe, how would you help my child, describe, and not everyone in the disability community will be receptive to that, but I think a lot of us will, because we do want to be included. We want people to learn more about us and our families, and because that is the way that we can further be included down the road.
I'm so curious if there was a moment at any time in the last 20 years where you feel like someone who does not already belong to the special needs community, they don't have a child, I should say, they might belong to it in another way, if someone really did it right, where you thought, oh my gosh, I feel so seen. Do you have a story where someone really kind of blew you away with their empathy or allowing you to feel seen?
Gosh, I probably have a million of them, honestly. Like there is this, we joke in our family about the Down syndrome effect. We have people that almost go out of their way to acknowledge our child, our daughter. And that was probably most seen on Halloween, when my two kids, who had the same pumpkin bucket, would go to the same number of houses, and my daughter would have twice as much candy as my son would. So there's that side of it. But I think there's also just when it is those moments when you are either in Target shopping and someone comes up to you and it's usually because they have a friend or a loved one or someone they are connected to the Down syndrome community or the disability community in some way, and they come up and they introduce themselves and they just say hi. And I've had lots of those moments. And I will say too, we have some friends who moved to another part of Dallas from out of state about 10 years ago. And so we got to know, I went to high school with the husband, and I became really good friends with the wife. And over the years, we, would see each other every few months and became good friends. And then during COVID, they came to see our new house in the backyard, and they loved our neighborhood so much that they ended up buying a house about 5 doors down. And so now we've become really, really good friends with them. And they have gotten to see more of what our daily life is like, being around Casey a lot of the time, and just, me, I think too, just opening up and being more vulnerable and sharing, the hard stuff that goes along with the good stuff. And they have become just the greatest allies for us. And I will say I am so appreciative of that, of those that are willing to ask the questions and just be there to listen to the hard stuff, to the times when Casey wasn't acting right and I was embarrassed for whatever reason, or we had medical issues that were just overwhelming and I felt just really stressed out, and they were there to just listen. And they show up on your doorstep with just, a candle or a dessert or a bottle of wine, because they just are able to sit there with you in it. And to be open to understanding that, I think has just really impacted our hearts a lot, honestly. So so lots of times, honestly.
I love that. And so I think the flip side of that is, I have no doubt you've had some very frustrating experiences. And I know recently you had talked a little bit about being frustrated with something that popped up. And so I'm just curious to give people a sense of some of the challenges you're navigating. Could you share something, maybe it's your recent story, but an example where don't feel like we've made the progress that we should have as far
Yeah.
as exposure and inclusion for our children.
Yeah, yeah. It's fortunately it's getting fewer and far between, the difficulties or the seeing of the discrimination, honestly, that we witness. I will say on a general note, some of the hardships that we deal with, we have, especially as she's gotten older, we have to work with government agencies to get kind of some of the basic things like healthcare and some services that we are in desperate need of. And so working with that is a constant battle.
I'm sure.
Working with healthcare providers who may not have a full understanding of the needs of people in our disability community. We have to kind of be the quarterback. We have to educate our own healthcare providers about that. So things like that we are constantly dealing with on a regular basis. The most recent example was really kind of a lightning rod for me, honestly. It woke me up out of my complacency of, because I do see a lot of good positive things that have happened over the years. But this was an instance where my daughter's school has an adult program for individuals with intellectual disabilities. Most of them went through my daughter's, it's a small private Catholic school started by the School Sisters of Notre Dame. I mean, they're just precious, and they started this 60 years ago, so they had the foresight back then.
Amazing.
And it's been a wonderful program, and it's grown. It's called the STAR program. The STAR program has grown so much because of the demand, because our kids are living longer and healthier and happier, and we want them in the community. There is a lot of demand for this program, so it's growing, and so we needed to find a new location, and we were all set to work with this location in a neighborhood, and it was a church that had a preschool attached to it, and unfortunately, the preschool parents, when they found out about it, were quite against having our STAR students be within the same building, and to give them the benefit of the doubt, I think that some of them just didn't have the education. They didn't have the awareness, the exposure of our students, and honestly, what the positive things that could have resulted from this connection, this location where they were both kind of in the same building. There are a lot of things that their preschool students honestly missed out on by not having us be a part of this location. And I think the first is just, again, like being exposed to people that are different than them. So I think that there was just this fear initially. Unfortunately, we tried to give them the opportunity to be educated about it. And it just, I think, there were things that went around that were some mistruths that people got a hold of, and they made it public. And so it was really disheartening for us as parents to see that there is still this stigma, this fear. And unfortunately, I worry that, those students are getting this impression in their homes that our kids and our adults are scary or not to be around and not to be associated with. And I think that has lit a fire under me. Honestly, I want to let people know. I want to let the me of 20 years ago know you don't have to be fearful of people with intellectual disabilities in the disability community. The more that we can understand and include them, the better off we all are. Not just the people with intellectual disabilities, but we all are better. Our society is better. We have a lot to learn from them, and we just need to give them that opportunity. So it was disheartening to see, but we are moving on. We're going to find a different location, and it's like I said, it's lit a fire under me to just increase the awareness and education of those. And so that might be fearful, that might just not have the understanding and exposure. So I appreciate you letting me come on and talk about it.
Absolutely. And that's your experience in a good-sized city that appears to have resources. And so as you're talking, I'm thinking, I live in a small city. I'm frankly not sure what our resources are, but I think the smaller cities you get to, you probably have people who feel even more isolated, and it feels less progressive depending on where you live, on how far we've come.
Yeah.
And it makes me want to ask you about folks who are listening who don't live in Dallas or, a bigger city with more opportunities in every area. What is your advice to them around finding community? So when they say, sure, I'd love to work on change, you probably have a community in Dallas where you say, we're going to rally the troops and we are going to make things happen. But I'm curious how you encourage parents to find community if they're in a smaller community.
Yeah, it does get to be a little bit more difficult, I think. I will tell you, though, my experience as I've traveled with Casey, we always have, someone that will come up and talk to us, and especially when we've been in small towns. I will say that there is an element of, if there is someone in that small town who has grown up and been there and people are around them and exposed to them, they are more likely to be supportive of that individual and of the disability community. I have noticed that. It's been very interesting. Some of those smaller towns do rally around, because they have that exposure. They have someone, they have a loved one in their community that they care about. And so they see that potential. So I will say that as far as if you are in a smaller community and you haven't seemed to have found your, like, we all need connection, right?
The village.
There's definitely, yes, we all need our village. And I don't know what I would do without my fellow moms, because we can witness our child doing something that, like is frustrating or whatever. And we can just look across the room and be like, yep, I get it. You have that connection, automatic connection. So if you are seeking that out, I would say, first of all, there are lots of groups. I mean, this is a positive about social media. There are Facebook groups. There's lots of people on Instagram that are talking about their kids with disabilities and sharing the good and the hard. And so even if it's just digitally, finding that connection through some groups online. We did not have that when Casey was born 20 years ago. And so it took me about 6 months to finally meet someone else, another mom of someone with Down syndrome, for me to be like, oh, okay. And their child was 8 years old at the time. And I attended his birthday party and I was like, wow, oh my gosh, this can happen. Like it was this first light bulb that went off and I was like, oh my gosh, I can have somewhat of a normal life,
Yes.
And it took me a while. So I really, truly believe in the power of connectivity. And so if you are having trouble finding that in a small community, at least seek out digitally. There are national organizations I know within the Down syndrome community. They offer yearly conferences that you can attend. So that might be a way. I know that there are some, and I'm happy to share some of these with you so you can put them in the show notes.
Oh, great.
There are some organizations that are being developed by parents that gather, that give us an opportunity to get together and share our experience and connect with others. So there's more of that. There's more of that coming, which I'm so glad to see. So yeah, they are out there. They want to connect with you. So keep, I think, trying online first of all.
Yes.
And just talking, just sharing your story, just being able to share your own story with others will help educate and start to invite people into your community.
Absolutely. That's great. And before we wrap up, I did want to circle back on something you mentioned about the Buddy Walk. I think I saw the Buddy Walk happening here in Charlottesville. We were at an event to honor our friends who lost their daughter. And at the same park, there was all this stuff set up. It looked like it was going to be a big party. And as my daughter Ainsley and I were leaving, this huge group came walking and we saw our friend. And she said, Mom, there's our friend. And so he
great.
waved to us and we waved to him. And I said, I bet that's the university's partnership. But it was clear they were going on a walk. I don't know if it's in the community or the university specifically, but to let the listeners know, particularly those in the Charlottesville area, I will look and see if we have it. But I loved that idea of you mentioning the buddy walk as a way for families to get expose their children.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do a little research on it, and I will post it in the show notes, because I think that's an easy go for a walk, hang out with a lot of fun people, easy way to expose our young kids.
Super fun. Yeah, they're really, really fun.
They look like they were having a grand time. They were walking with a boombox. People were dancing.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
It looked very fun.
Yeah, they're all over the country. Yeah.
Yeah, which is great. So that seems like a very, my group of listeners are action takers. So it seems like it'll be an easy way for them to act on what they've heard about here today. And, I'm so grateful we were able to connect, to chat about this really important group in our community, and both the children and the parents. And so thank you so much for joining me. And before we wrap up, I would love to know if there's one thing that you wish every parent knew as it relates to our special need communities.
Oh gosh, just one thing. I think that for the most part, it's hard to speak generally for the rest of the parents, but I think that we want to be included. We want to be part of your community. And we, just like you, we want our kids to get the most out of life that they can. And if it seems like maybe we are standoffish or we are not, engaging as much, it could just be because we're tired. We're overwhelmed. We're a little nervous or introverted or protective of our kids. And so if you have an opportunity to reach out to us, I think that that can go a long, long, long way. Yeah.
I love that. Well, thanks again for joining me. Can you tell everyone how they can find you?
Sure, yeah. So my podcast is called Especially Organized, Sensible Solutions for Special Needs Moms. And my website is Your Space Reclaimed. And you can find me on Instagram at Your Space Reclaimed and Facebook as well.
Perfect. Well, we will link to that in the show notes. And I've loved connecting with you again. And hopefully we will see each other in person again soon.
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. And it's so lovely to chat with you again.
All right. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to How Long Till Bedtime. To learn how we can work together to improve your child's sleep, please visit sleepandwellnesscoach.com.